Hey audiophiles, Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Sitting right here is the Technics SU-R1000, which is their flagship integrated amplifier. It's packed with a ton of really innovative features that are not found in any other piece of equipment. So I've spent a few weeks with it now. I installed it in my apartment here in Miami for the winter. Video linked below. So in this video, I'm gonna do a few things. I'm going to go over those features because they're very unique and unusual. It really requires a deep dive to understand where it shines. I'm gonna open it up and take a look inside and see what the build quality is, the component selection, layout, etc. And we're going to listen to a couple of tunes on my reference SL-1200G Turntable sitting beside it. So hang in there. It's going to be a long one, probably 30 to 40 minutes, but we'll jump in. All right, let's get started with the features and functionality because we have a lot to cover. I'm going to put chapters below so you can kind of scroll back and forth and skip to any steps that you might be more interested in. But let's start with just the basics. It's a 150 watt integrated amplifier. And of course, the model number is the SU-R1000. It's in the top of the line for Technics. It's 300 watts into 4 ohms, so it doubles its power output into 4 ohms. So it really should be able to drive just about everything out there. It's pretty heavy at 50 pounds, but it's not obscenely heavy like some of the other integrated amps we've seen where it takes 2 people to carry. You know, this would be a competitor to the McIntosh MA-1200, which is a 2-man lift. So gladly, this one is at 50 pounds, still beautifully built. There's no skimping in materials or metals or anything, but it is manageable at 50 pounds. It's 4 devices in one box, right? You're getting an amplifier, you're getting a preamplifier, which is the piece that controls volume and inputs and sources. You're getting a formidable phono section. That's the piece responsible for converting the output from your low output cartridge. And then on top of that, you're getting a DAC, a built-in digital to analog converter, and the opposite, an analog to digital converter, and we'll go more into that a bit later. It has no less than 6 digital inputs on it. It has phono inputs in both RCAs and XLRs, which is a really nice option. And it's got some sort of line level inputs as well in both XLR and single-ended. For outputs, it has 4 sets of outputs, in other words, 2 pairs of outputs. It's got a record out, which is nice. This has been missing in a lot of pieces lately for tape decks, reel-to-reels, etc. And nice to see that back. And it has a preamp output as well as a record in. All right, so this is the part of the video where I ask for something in return. A couple of things, and I'll make it real quick. First of all, we sell Technics online. We love the brand. We're passionate about it. We do lots of turntables, SL-1200G being our most popular. If you're in the market, I'd love it if you would consider us to supply it for you. You will get customer service like no other place. And we have the Google reviews to back it, so have a look. Second, it takes a bunch of time, as you can see, to put these videos together. Just putting the screws back took me almost 30 minutes. So for them to be successful, we need engagement. And the way the algorithm works with YouTube, if you guys give me a thumbs up, and more importantly, if you leave a comment, that's really helpful. And the comment could be, you know, give me your opinions on the piece, you know, what integrator you have, and you have one of these, what sort of associated equipment you have with it. So any sort of engagement or just saying, hey, Fernando, man, thanks for the video would be super helpful. And lastly, we have tons of videos for you to watch on YouTube. We have almost 10 to 15 just on Technics products alone, Klipsch, McIntosh, you name it. SkyFiAudio.com is our website where you can see all these items for sale. I'll link below to other relevant videos from Technics. Thank you. So what type of amplifier is this? Well, it's sort of like a hybrid Class D amplifier. Now, Technics doesn't like it when you call this a Class D because technically it's not to be compared with other Class D amplifiers. It's really actually a fully digital amplifier. That means the signal remains digital throughout the entire signal path, which is a little unusual for integrated amplifiers and something that Technics is pioneering. It does have several analog inputs, including a very capable phono section, and those are converted through an A to D, an analog to digital converter, into the digital domain where they stay that way throughout the signal. Those analog sources are all converted to 192 kilohertz, 24-bit using a Geno engine, which they're sort of marketing and pioneering here, while all the digital sources come in digital and stay that way. So there's no DDA converters built in. From a digital point of view, it is capable of up to 384 kilohertz PCM at 32 bits and able to decode both DSD and MQA, which is pretty cool. On the phono section, it can do moving coil and moving magnet, and quite a bit more than that, which we'll talk down in a nutshell, you know, the sound is absolute, it's pure, it's uncolored, and very, very low noise floor. That's really how I can sum up the performance of the amplifier. Now the price is not cheap. It's a $10,000 piece. There are tons of integrated amplifiers nowadays in the $10,000 to $13,000 price range. I did mention earlier the SL-1200 from McIntosh. If you're in the market, that's definitely a contender worth considering. But it's going to be missing a bunch of the unique features of this piece. Now, when you look through the brochures and all the literature from Technics, it's super confusing. They've got a lot of marketing terms, a lot of engineering terms. Frankly, I had to spend a good 45 minutes reading through all of it, trying to distill it down for you. So I'm going to go over 4 or 5 key points or features in this amplifier, but I'm going to try to simplify it from what it is written online. So the first trick up its sleeve, it's called LAPC. It's load adaptive phase calibration. So in a nutshell, what this amplifier is able to do is through a calibration process that I'll run for you a bit later, this amplifier is capable of measuring the impedance of the speakers and the load that they present. So all speakers are different in terms of how they work, the voltages that they push back into the amplifier, their impedance throughout the range, all varies. This amplifier is able to measure that with specifically your speakers and adapt itself to it. So essentially, hook up your speakers, you run through this test process where it creates a bunch of noises, and it's taking active measurements of the load that the speaker is representing. And that's really good because it allows it to keep the noise as low as possible, distortion as low as possible, and adapt itself for the best performance. Now they've got another thing called ADCT, active distortion canceling technology. Again, a mouthful of technical terms. It's essentially, it's a system that's built in that actively removes distortion. So it's constantly sort of measuring what's coming in, measuring what's coming out, and doing some fancy math to try to eliminate anything that shouldn't be in the signal, which is essentially noise. The power amplifier section is a bit unusual as well. Most sort of digital or Class D amplifiers are running at around 100 kilohertz. This guy runs at 400 kilohertz, way far from the listening range, and it uses an incredibly low distortion or low noise regulation. Again, things that just result in a very quiet, very low distortion. Now, if we open this up, and we will later, as you know, I love opening stuff up. This has 4 separate power supplies. You know, one for the analog circuit, for the digital circuit, the phono stage, and left and right channels, all completely powered separately, and that helps quite a bit. It allows you many things, including keeping power supplies close to where they need to be used and keeping them isolated from each other. My absolute favorite part of the amplifier has got to be the phono section. And this is where you typically have to go to an external phono section to achieve this sort of performance. And that's why this piece, even at $10,000, is quite a bargain. The phono section is like nothing I've seen. It's incredibly sophisticated, very capable, and has a lot of neat features. And best of all, some of those features you can access them from the remote control, so you could be at your listening position sort of tweaking things, which is pretty rare nowadays. Phono section happens to be fully discrete, and the analog input section is fully discrete, and it is also fully balanced, which means the left and right channels are completely isolated from each other. That's what allows us to run XLR cables, which is a feature that I'd love to see on more phono preamps. But some turntables are able to run fully balanced, meaning they're able to use XLR cables. Not all turntables can do that. It depends how the tone arm is wired, and this one can. What does this translate into feature-wise? Well, the phono section takes the analog signal from the turntable and converts it into the digital domain. A lot of people will scoff at that, but it's really where it allows this to do a lot of its magic. Once it's in the digital domain, it is DSP processed and able to do a bunch of great things. First of all, it can eliminate crosstalk. Now, we calibrate hundreds of turntables a year, and we struggle with crosstalk quite a bit, and that really shows through in the music. So this has the ability, through a calibration process that's unique to this piece, to essentially reduce or eliminate crosstalk. Now, it takes us at a calibration bench hours and hours to dial in a cartridge just right. This can kind of make up for a lot of those shortcomings. Now, as I said, once it's in the digital domain, it can do a lot of cool things, including the ability to have multiple selectable equalization curves. So for those of you that are new to this, Records or LPs are recording using an equalization curve that makes up for the shortcomings of vinyl as a technology. So they are induced with an equalization curve to give it a little bit more bass and sort of adjust certain frequencies. EQ curves would include IEC, AES, Columbia, Decca, RCA, etc. And with using the remote, we're able to kind of scroll right through them. And here's the long list of them. It's pretty cool, and you can do this from your listening position. So if you put in an old mono record, or you put in something that was recorded early Columbia or Decca, you're able to dial it in just right. Now, for those of you that are Technics turntable fans, well, they've got you covered here. We've got 3 settings completely independent from each other for the Phono Section. So you're able to hit a menu button, go to the Cartridge Optimizer menu, and then select out of 3 cartridges. So I've got my Sumiko Starling, which is what's on the 1200G, set here to input 1, and I've got 2 more. So if you've got a separate head shell mounted, or you've got a turntable with several tone arms, you can just scroll through which calibration specific you want. Calibration process is super cool. You're essentially going to go into the calibration menu, put in a very specific record that comes with this piece, and it's going to play a long sequence of what's called time stretch pulses. So it's going to make some noises over your speakers. It's going to measure the capabilities of your phono cartridge, and it's going to automatically adjust for a bunch of parameters that would take you forever to figure out on your own. And again, there's 3 of those that you can save. The other benefit of having all this done in the digital domain is that you're not adding a bunch of switches, capacitors, resistors to control these things. It's all done digitally, so it's super quiet and efficient in the process. Now, in terms of construction, it's quite impressive. Again, it weighs in at 50 pounds. The front cover here, or the faceplate, is a 10 millimeter thick aluminum solid piece. It's got 6 millimeter aluminum sides. It's got a 6 millimeter aluminum top. So there's no crappy sheet metal here. This is all beautifully built. So at least you're getting quite a bit of metal for your money. When we look inside, we're going to be able to identify some cast iron insulators, super high quality terminals. We've got Nutric XLR connections here. We've got brass and gold plated RCA connections. The volume control is built out of a solid billet aluminum piece, and internally it uses gain FETs, which are pretty sophisticated devices. Also, they talk about some of the insulators, especially in the digital section. Whenever you connect a computer up to an integrated amp, you're likely to induce a bunch of noise. I've done this a million times where I'm trying to connect something like a streamer or a computer or a USB connection onto an integrated, and all I do is end up inducing a bunch of noise. They've addressed this, and we're going to try to identify those components. All right, let's talk connections a bit more in depth. So starting with the speaker outputs, there are 2 pairs of speakers you can configure, and you can actually play them both simultaneously. So if you've got a second room, we have the ability to connect that up. Now, you won't have individual volume control between room A and room B, but you will be able to switch them on and off independently, which is super nice. So if you've got a dining room or maybe an outdoor zone, this amplifier can handle it. The rest of it is very logically laid out. Let's focus on this particular box here, which is the analog inputs. So down below, we've got the phono, we've got the XLR, which I mentioned earlier, which is unusual, and a single set of RCAs, and these, even though there's only 2 sets, they can configure up to 3 different cartridges in terms of settings. And then we've got the earth, which is your ground setting for the tone arm. Above it, we've got 2 sets of analog inputs, right? We've got 2 sets in RCA format, and then one of them can also be done in XLR. So this is where you would maybe connect some other analog device like let's say an FM tuner, maybe a cassette deck, or anything of the like. Most of the other sources you're probably going to connect to digital to leverage the topology of this integrated amplifier. So here is the analog section. Now moving on to the digital section, we've got no less than 6 digital inputs. I've got 2 pairs of coax using RCA connectors. I've got 2 sets of opticals using Toslink, and 2 sets of USB cables for hooking up PCs and streamers of the like. It also has a regular USB connector, but this is only used for upgrades and maintenance and stuff. But I think it will power. If you have a little iPhone charger or some sort of remote charger, I suspect this will power it nicely, so it's a convenience outlet. This section up here are convenience connections. Probably not going to use any of them, but we do have a preamplifier output in case you want to use this as only a preamp. A main in case you want to use the amplifier section, record in and record out for tape decks and devices of the like. And lastly, we've got a standard IAC electrical outlet and a control for IR devices and things like that. The voltage is specified as 120 volts, so this is specific to this US market. And next, I want to cover an interesting connection option that Technics brought to my attention. Now, I wasn't able to confirm this myself because I don't have double sets of speaker cables, but let me go over the premise for you. This particular Sonos Faber speaker has dual inputs, right? So this pair of inputs is running the tweeter and this one is running the woofer, right? So we have the ability to remove these little jumpers that were sitting here and here. We're able to remove these and essentially separately run a signal to the highs from the lows. Amplifier looks like this, right? We've got output A and output B, so I've run the tweeter to output A and I've run the woofer to output B. Now, it's my understanding you can actually run the LAPC combinations like we did before separately for the tweeter and the woofer. So I suspect you would run one, turn on speaker A, run that, turn on speaker B, run that, and that it would all kind of magically all work together. And you get the benefits of truly by-wiring a speaker amplifier. Again, I haven't confirmed this. Pretty interesting option for those of you more sophisticated audiophiles that are super nerdy and love to kind of explore all the corners of hi-fi. The configuration that most of you are going to use is essentially just a single set of speaker cables with the jumpers in place, and then the back of the amplifier you're going to just connect to output A using the red and the. In terms of controls in the front, real simple stuff. We've got a power button, a headphone jack. This actually has a pretty decent headphone amplifier built in to use with really standard headphones. The motorized control volume, this is that piece that I was saying is a billet aluminum, and it is absolutely silky smooth. Beautiful job with that. To display, and then the input selector, and that's the only thing it does is selects inputs. It doesn't go through menus or there's no push button on it. It's literally just an input selection to go through the myriads of inputs. And then on the display, pretty simple, 0 to 300 watt rating on the meters, and also negative 60 dBs to plus 6 dBs at 8 ohms. And then a little LED here is for the LAPC. That's when you know it's activated. That will turn orange. And later on when I play the song, I will cycle this on and off to show you guys the difference. So I've got this thing apart, and boy, was it a lot of screws. Absolutely madness to get it to this level of deconstruction. And I ask you guys, please don't do this at home. There's some pretty high voltages in here. It's not an easy thing to open it up. It did take me quite a bit of time to figure it out because it is very complicated. And I open it up so that you guys don't have to, so please don't do it. This is the top panel, incredibly complex. Looks like that 6mm aluminum we talked about. Some sort of damping material, and you do see this on high-end pieces. It's sort of like an inert piece of something, not quite sure where it is, attached to the thing. This keeps vibration from activating this panel and vibrating. Beautiful work on the grills. We've got additional dampers. These are some sort of squishy thing that keeps contact with the heat sinks. And then the complicated brackets for engagement. This is how the whole thing interlocks together like a Chinese puzzle. Side panels are super sweet, very heavy extrusion aluminum. And these panels are for the sides themselves. These had 1 billion screws each. And now we get an initial look at the layout, which is quite impressive. From a structural point of view, they've layered up this chassis in order to fit everything and to lay it out in a logical sense. So essentially, if we slide down the middle here, the top section is the amplification section with one exception in the middle. I'll show you that later. And then the lower part is essentially the input, initial power supply, and then the analog boards on the other side. So and it is all extremely rigid. Right now it's not because it's all off, so you'll see a little wobble in the power panel, but essentially once you get the sub-chassis and then the chassis, external chassis, this becomes a rigid block of aluminum, which is incredibly impressive. So I must admit, I've opened hundreds and hundreds of pieces of equipment. I've done a gazillion repairs, and this one is very interesting. Everything wasn't immediately apparent to me. I had to poke around, really do some looking online, talking to friends to really understand the flow and what all the devices and boards do. So I'm going to try to do the best at going through what I know. And there's going to be a bunch of errors in there. This is all speculation. I have not spoken to anyone at Technics as to what the actual component layout is. So let's start with the power supplies. We saw in the literature that there are in fact 4 power supplies, and I think I've identified them all. Here is the power supply dedicated to the right channel, or left channel. I'd have to look in the back, but here is one power supply and here's the second one. And if we split this thing down the middle, this is the sort of dual mounted design that we discussed, where this power supply is dedicated to a single channel and vice versa. So this is what we want to look for in an amplifier of this price point. And at the right side, we get a glimpse at the second power supply, which is probably this guy right here. And based on its red and black output cables, I suspect it feeds both this DAC and actually that's not the DAC, essentially the analog section. Both of these boards are in fact the analog, and we'll go back to that. So power supply number 2 is sitting here on the right side. Power supply number 3 is sitting here on this other side, and it feeds from the mains. So we see essentially the filter board. This is the input board from the AC outlet. Comes through some filtration, probably there's some fuses in there, jumps into this first board here, which is the power supply as well. So in terms of voltage flow, we see these very heavy gauge connectors going to the power supplies down from below. So that's what's feeding the voltage line voltage to these 2 power supplies, and then these guys, if you follow them, they feed into, actually they're attached to this particular part of the circuit. So this is the 400 hertz or kilohertz switching power supplies that I mentioned earlier. And they feed the amplification stage, which is this right here. So you can see the black and white wire comes from here into the amplification. And then from here down that multi-pin connector into the output board, which goes through some filters here, and then out these black and white cables into the speaker control boards. So the flow is essentially, from here to here, here, back into here, and then to the backboard. In this board here, we'll see some, not just the speaker binding posts, but the control relays. Now, this being a digital amplifier, you're not going to see the myriad of output devices and transistors that you generally see in Class A/B, so it's a bit different than what we're used to looking at. Now, if I compare this little metal box to their brochure, they do show this as being maybe the Juno, where the DSP happens. It comes up from a ribbon cable from below. It's a little daughter board. They've chosen to put it right here. I imagine it's for isolation or to get it very close to the amplification stage, one of the two. And then the exact same thing on this particular side here. In terms of component selection and quality, this is what we'd expect to see at this price range. So really high quality multi-layered epoxy PC boards, great quality filter capacitors in the power supply or the amplification stage. Really good point-to-point wiring, using terminal strips and screws and high quality connectors throughout. So spot on from what we'd expect. Now over here on the lower side, this is the analog section. So the phono board is this lower board here, and then up here is the analog input card. You can kind of get a glimpse at these little pigtail boards using the discrete op amps. And again, super high quality capacitors here. This is really where it matters, and you can see they've gone a bit even further than on the amplifier boards. And then in here is probably some of the more delicate stuff, right? So the things that are more susceptible to noise and interference, which is the very, very low voltage from the phono section, is managed in there. We're not going to get to see the center. Beyond this board, if you go further towards the middle of the chassis, would be the DAC. I'm not going to go that far to show you the DAC. It's just way too much disassembly for today. Sitting on the back of the front panel, we see here the motor for the volume control, and the potentiometer just forward of it for controlling the volume. The headphone board is right here. Pretty simple affair. Small number of components for that. The back of the meters and not much else. That is the input selector. And now I got about 30 minutes worth of reassembly before we get to the next part of the video, which is to go through some of the menus and get an understanding of how this thing works and how it's set up. So a few thoughts while I reassemble this. So what do I open these things up for? Obviously, I'm a curious person. I like to see how things are designed and built, but also, you know, when I'm evaluating a piece of equipment, I like to know whether or not I am getting essentially my money's worth for the piece, right? A lot of the dollars in HiFi go to marketing and logistics and all that stuff. And I like to make sure that there's enough of it going into both design, the engineering, and the build quality. And this really hits the mark. $10,000 is a ton of money, I realize that, but there's definitely $10,000 worth of technology in this piece and construction. So, and that seems to be the case with a lot of the Technics products. You look at a turntable, for example, the SL-1200G, you know, that's a beautiful piece of engineering. It's a $4,300 turntable that should cost $10,000. Between the direct drive technology and the power supply and all the other stuff that goes into it, it really is quite a value, in, you know, even though it's not an inexpensive piece. I also look for little tiny examples of attention to detail where things really matter. You know, something as simple as, you know, having used Loctite and a screw for the assembly of the chassis that's not going to vibrate in transport, or the quality of the components and the connectors themselves. I pointed out before the rail connectors coming back from the power supply and the type of cable they use, the type of attachment, and mounting block, that all stuff adds up over. Alright, so I brought my Sonos Fiber speakers, hooked them up to the integrated amp, and we're going to go through the LAPC setup for you so you can experience it. Now it's pretty simple, and for my writing the manual, it gets overwritten by just running it again. So there's no need to save, there's no multiple saving parameters, you just essentially run it. So to do so, you just hold the LAPC button down, some clicking happens, and the fun begins. So it's going through a series of test tones. And mind you, there's no microphone anywhere in this room. It's actually just measuring the energy that the speaker feeds back into the integrated amp. And it's going to do it at a bunch of different gains. And it's alternating between left and right channels right now. So it's about halfway through. So if you can imagine, as the woofer extends, when it retracts back to its original position, it creates some energy, right? It's an electromotive coil. And that energy comes right back into the amplifier. And that is what we're measuring right now. And it's going to go through a ton of adjustments. It's going to measure the signal as it leaves the amplifier. And it's going to compare its output to its input and make adjustments in the DSP. I think we're almost done here. All right, I think that was the last bit. So now it's complete and it is enabled. You'll notice the little light here. Don't know if you can make it out. Little LAPC light is lit. And the exact same button that we use to activate it is used to toggle it on and off. LAPC off, LAPC on. And again, later in the demonstration phase, we'll listen to the differences. All right, so let's go over some of the menus and how to control this thing. So this will save you a ton of time, so you don't have to figure this out on your own. So the first thing to understand is that there are two types of menus. There's the setup menu, which is for the entire unit, and then there's a menu, which is only for specific to inputs. Right, so you're going to get different results when you hit menu depending on what input you're on, right? So let's start with the setup. Setup is going to give us the ability to scroll, and to scroll you're just going to use the up and down buttons. So we've got tone controls, that's bass treble, and the ability to defeat them completely. We've got our balance left to right, a volume attenuator. That's essentially to, I believe that's to limit the volume. Return brings you back, by the way. So language, tone controls, balance, volume attenuator, MQA decoding, it's the ability to turn on and off the MQA. Speakers, this is selecting between A and B, or both A and B. Remember, we have discrete outputs on it, or at least switchable outputs. Pre-out, to control the status of the pre-out. Record out, same thing, and main in. Auto off, this is for the unit to turn off by itself if there is no activity. Dimming of the display for a darkly lit room, this is very helpful. Some remote control options, some system control, model number, initialization, firmware version. This is to update firmware. Diving a bit deeper, language allows us to switch between French and English. I suspect this is a US market unit, so it's limited to the US, or English and French for Canada. Tone controls, we're going to dive in there. The ability to turn them on and off, and not much else. Balance left and right, so when you click on that, you get a little graduated meter, the ability to balance it in dBs, left to right. Volume attenuator, when we go in there, it's either off or on, and by how many dBs. So here we would be able to adjust that. Oh, I lost my place, so I'm going to go back to setup. MQA decoding, jumping in there, it's on or off. Speakers, this is where we're able to select between off, A, B, A plus B, and off. So we're going to leave it at A plus B. Pre-out is either on or off. Record out is on or off. Main in is on or off. And now we're back to its baseline, which is just the input, naming the input. Now remember, on the menu, it's specific to the input. So for example, on digital inputs like coax, menu only brings up LAPC mode. And that can either be normal or low latency. I don't know what that means. I'm going to have to ask my folks at Technics. I'll post it in the comments when I get an answer. If I am in a different input, I can go ahead and use the remote to select, for example, optical 1. Menu yields exact same thing. So really, both optical and coax inputs give us the same menu options. But when we get to PC, it's the same thing. And then let's switch over to XLR. Now we're in an analog input. Analog input is going to give us an attenuator specific, and this is probably for volume matching amongst different devices, sources. So if you want your line input to be volume matched to, say, your turntable, so that you don't jump out of your seat when you change inputs, this is where you would make that adjustment. So we've got, again, hitting menu, I've got attenuator, I've got a subsonic filter. This is probably a rumble filter. I imagine this takes off at certain frequencies, and that's just on or off. So just attenuator and subsonic filter are the only menu options for that particular input, which was analog. Line 1 is going to be the exact same thing. Same for line 2, record in. Now this is where it gets a little trickier. So under Phono XLR, our menu option is going to have both gain, subsonic filter, EQ curve. This is essentially, since we're now at a phono input, this is the ability to select among the many equalization curves for LPs. So starting with RIAA, IEC, Columbia, DECA, AES, NAB, RCA, and we're back at the same one. So gain, subsonic filter, EQ curve, and the Cartridge Optimizer. We're going to jump into this a bit later. But in here is where you would select to start the measurements, which we don't want to do. So I'm going to skip that. All right, moving over to the second phono input, which is just RCAs. Should yield the exact same thing. Although we have a nice moving magnet, moving coil selection, gain, subsonic filter, and EQ curve in the Cartridge Optimizer. Now remember, we can optimize up to 3 cartridges with the system, so this is where you would select it. I think that covers all the inputs. So that's pretty much the entire menu structure, so it's not that complicated. Again, the setup menus are different than the menu menus, or a specific menu for the input. Not sure how to better word that for you. Looking at other options on the remote, we've got bass, treble, and mid buttons right on it, which is kind of cool. You don't have to go through a bunch of menus to get there. So you essentially just press bass, and now you use the arrows. Well, you hit bass and you use the up and down arrows to go plus and minus. Same for mids and same for treble. I suspect direct probably skips over the tone controls, but it also may do some avoiding some internal circuitry for a cleaner signal. Our Phono EQ, this is kind of cool, is right here as well. You don't have to go into a menu. You can just kind of cycle through the different equalization curves just by pressing that. A mute button is self-explanatory. Some numbers for direct access if you got a different, really anything below here is in case you have another device from Technics. At the top, we've got direct input buttons, so you can either use the up and down arrows or you can go direct inputs. And then info just goes through the important settings for that particular input. Just cycles through all of them. And then the dimmer dims everything in 2 levels. One is, here's the brightest level, a little bit lower. Yet another lower, so that's 3 levels of brightness, and then finally display off while the unit's still in operation. And I think that really covers the entire remote and menu structure. So as you can see, it's not that complicated. A lot of great features packed into this, but in terms of using it, pretty simple. For the next bit, we're going to run through the Cartridge Optimizer, which is really the best trick that this machine has. It's absolutely great phono stage, super quiet, and probably the easiest thing out there to set up. So we're not going to be dealing with dip switches. We're not going to have to open anything up. We're not going to have to be guessing about specifications and trying to rifle through a cartridge manufacturer to find some obscure spec. Everything that this machine needs to know, it's going to find out on its own. So check it out. It comes with this record, calibration record. We're going to pop it in an SL-1200G, which is sitting right here, and run through the process. By the way, this is our custom record weight for the SL-1200G. This is available on our website. We drop about 10 of these every month or so. And set up on this turntable, I've got a Sumiko Starling, my absolute favorite cartridge for a SL-1200G. I'm going to go ahead and queue up side A. You can see this is 2 or 3 tracks on each side. I've never really been asked to put side B in, so I'm not quite sure what it's for. Maybe it's just a replication of the first one. So I'm going to do that, power up, and start the process. I know it's going to ask me to queue it up, so I'm going to do that right now. And track 1 lands somewhere right about here. All right, moving over to the amplifier. This is super simple. So once we are on the correct input, which is going to be our phono, I've got just the RCA jacks connected, so I'm just regular phono. I am set to moving coil. Let me get a better view of this for you. I got both things into view. So I'm going to go to phono. I'm going to use my remote. Again, there are no controls on the front of those amplifiers, so I'm just going to go to menu. Let's scroll down to Cartridge Optimizer. And I'm going to override number 1, which is already what I've got labeled. I labeled the first part. All these AAAs are left in place because I'm lazy. But it's essentially you can label the cartridge with whatever brand the model you've got. Measurement start. I'm going to hit OK. Prepare calibration record, which I have done. Hit OK. Waiting for playing. So this is my cue to drop the lever down. And again, there's no microphones involved. We're not picking up anything come out of the speakers. This is purely between the turntable cartridge and the phono preamp. So it's going through its measuring. It's going to play a bunch of test tones here. I'm sure you can hear them. First the left channel, then the right channel. So this process is going to go on for a bit, so I'll skip forward so I don't bore you to death. That sounds like it's turned on some sort of pink noise. Now, there's a lot of mathematics that are happening in the background here, so this process is not just messing, but also doing the algorithms involved in getting the crosstalk absolutely spot on, getting the cartridge loading, and any other sort of gain settings that are optimal for this combination. That honking that you hear as a horn is not the calibration record. All right, so now it's going to move on to phase 3. This is going to be, I think, more test tones. Now it's doing the right channel only. Now skip forward again. All right, lift up the tone arm. Do that. I hit OK on the remote. So now it's processing. So I think that's actually it for the test tones themselves. Now there's a process of a few minutes to process the information is gathered. All right, so it took about maybe 7 or 8 minutes or so. Now it's at the completed phase, and we're going to hit the OK button to move on. And now we get to choose which of the 3 positions we want to save. I'm going to overwrite number 1, go to number 1, hit enter, overwrite. Okay, registered. So that's pretty much it. About the simplest process you'll ever encounter for setting up a cartridge. All right, for the listening section, we're going to play a track from Greg Porter's Liquid Spirit. My absolute favorite track on this album is going to be When Love Was King, which is on side 3, the last track. It's 6 minutes and 53 seconds. Sorry about that, guys. It's a bit of a long one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start off with the LDAP turned off, which is this little LED here. I'm not sure if you're going to be able to make it out, but I'll let you know during the video when I turn it back on and off. I have a remote that gives us that ability, as I mentioned earlier. It's got a button right here, so I can switch it on and off. So I'm going to turn it on a few times during playback so you can discern the differences. For turntable, or the rest of the equipment we've got here, you know, my trusty SL-1200G. I just finally got my own piece. I did a video on a bunch of upgrades. This one has a custom plinth from SkyFi Audio, custom acrylic cover you can't see here, our own puck, Technics branded, modified matte. For the cartridge, pretty standard stuff for us. We've got an OEM head shell from Technics, which is a super good quality head shell with our absolute favorite Sumiko Starling moving coil cartridge, boron cantilever. This thing's a beauty and a great, great complement to the 1200G, which I absolutely love. Obviously the SU-R1000 and Sonos Faber. These are the Olympico ones. Absolutely beautiful in a walnut finish. I am using Kimber cable for the speaker cables and not much else. The room is pretty lively, so I haven't really toned it down yet, but it still sounds very nice. I get lovely imaging from these speakers. My seating position, which is right over here. But for this purpose, I'm going to set the microphone on this little table here and the camera as well, so you can listen.
Once was a kingdom far, far away, where love was the rule of the day. Nothing more, nothing less than to give your friend your best. There's much more story that I could tell to make the hardest hearts swell. This is the story when love was king. When love was king, Do you remember when love was king? When love was king, I remember, oh, when love was king. He ruled the land with his fist unfurled, with open arms for the world, of hungry children. First he'd think to pull their lives from the brink. When love was king, he rescued souls lost in the sea. In drifting vessels, he would hear their plea. When love was king, he threw a line before they'd sink and gave the thirsty ones a drink. He told the meek that they should try to use the sword to smite the lie. That being kind is for the weak. When love was king, I pray the Lord these words we seek. Whoa. When love was king, he showed respect for every man, regardless of their skin and clan. Beside him stood his mighty queen, an equal force, wise and keen. He lifted up the underneath, and all his wealth he did bequeath. To those who toiled without a gain, so they would remember his reign. So seek some place to call your own, right next to
So some closing thoughts on this piece. Well, at $10,000, it is in fact a lot of money, but if that is within your budget, it's quite a bargain in terms of what you're getting in a single box, right? You're getting an amplifier, a preamp, a decent DAC, you know, and a bunch of really interesting features that I have not seen in any other piece of equipment. Construction is top notch, so that is, it feels like you're getting a valuable piece for that amount of money. It's a wonderful match for an SL-1200 turntable, or even if you are lucky enough to own an SL-1000R. We've talked a lot about a lot of features and a lot of terminology, but really from a user point of view, it's incredibly simple to set up. You can be up and running in 15 minutes with its basic settings, and then, you know, to run the LAPC, you hold a button and you give it 5 minutes, and then to run the Cartridge Optimizer, you go into that menu and initialize it while you play a record. So I've thrown around a lot of very complex and confusing terms, but in terms of the end user experience, this is as simple as it gets. The fact that we're not setting dip switches or manipulating the Phono Section and landing at a very, very high quality optimized phono configuration is a good value for me. You know, back 10, 20 years ago, folks were opting often for separate preamps, separate amplifiers, separate Phono Section, but I've noticed a trend in the last 10 years of really, really high quality integrated amplifiers to make people's lives simpler. There used to be a ton of compromises within an integrated amplifier. They were noisy, they ran hot, you know, all the different sections shared a common power supply. So a lot of engineering compromises, but the fact that this piece has 4 separate power supplies where everything is independently run, it just provides a really good, simple, you know, handy solution to have it all in one box. So if you're looking for the simplest setup, if you look here, I've got essentially 3 pieces of equipment. I've got a turntable, which is my source, an integrated, a pair of speakers. That's it. This is a wonderful system the way it is. In terms of power and performance, at 150 watts at 8 ohms, that is more than enough to drive most speakers. And doubling down at 300 watts for 4 ohms, this certainly gives it some extra muscle in case you've got a more complicated speaker load. That's it. As the Tappet brothers used to say, I've wasted another perfectly good hour of your time. I hope you enjoyed this video, and do please visit us online at skyfiaudio.com. And also, if you want to chat about this equipment, I'm available most weekdays. So give me a holler, go to our website. I'm Fernando from SkyFi Audio. Look forward to hearing from you.